First of all, I wanted to thank the worship team this morning. Didn't they do a great job? I think that I'm thoroughly convinced by this point that Connor is the drummer that I want to be when I grow up. And Justin, thank you for choosing that song in a key that I can sing. That's great. I think all of us have moments that we look back on. We try to think, how do we define Christmas? What does it mean to us? For some of us, that might be a specific song, which holds special meaning for some personal reason. Others, it might be the smell of a pine tree, because it reminds us of going out and cutting down a tree together as a family. Or it could be the smell of a plastic tree as you bring it out of the box for another year covered in dust. That will be my kids' experience. Maybe the smell of turkey in the oven, cookies freshly baked, apple cider, cinnamon buns, bacon wrapped, anything. Fresh snowfall as you remember the feeling of sledding down hills, which are no longer illegal to slide down. Sorry for being political. Whatever it is, each of us ties certain values and memories to Christmas. I know for me, one of many memories that I tie to Christmas is frosted glass. And I hear several of you wondering, why? It's so intriguing. Let me tell you more. I was in elementary school, and one thing that was just a reality for me and my family was that my dad worked out of town. He was a pipeliner. And come Christmas every year, sometimes he was around for lots of time, and sometimes he was around just for kind of a day before and a day after. And that was just the reality most of the time. And there was one year in particular when he was working up in Stewart, BC. Does anybody know where Stewart, BC is? A few people? It's right in that kind of like intersection of the Yukon and the Northwest Territories and BC. It's way up there. And he was working to clear roads, and that year he wasn't able to be around for Christmas. And so my mom, being the saint that she is, she decided that that wasn't okay and that our family had to be together for Christmas. And so she booked a Greyhound bus, booked 3 tickets for my sister and I and herself, and we got on the Greyhound and went up to Stewart. And when I say together, I mean together. So if you've ever been on a Greyhound, you know, A, they're not spacious to begin with, but then when you have my mom and then 2 of us little kids sitting on 2 seats for that long, I couldn't imagine it. Like I said, my mom is a saint, and I mean it. I couldn't imagine, now that I have 2 kids of my own, sitting on a Greyhound bus for that many hours, bodies everywhere. Just, no. Long way. Anyways, the windows. I remember that it was winter driving, it was cold outside, and the bus driver did the best that he possibly could to try to encourage us to all lose our Christmas weight by turning the bus into a sauna. And I remember putting my bare feet against the frosted glass in order to try and stay cool, of course, while laying across my mom. Saint. So for me, I think about frosted glass, and it reminds me of a time when my family did what it needed to do in order to be together on Christmas. And honestly, lots of my favorite Christmas joyful memories come from that year. The family together, sledding on snow banks because there was so much snow on the roads, on cardboard boxes, skating with borrowed skates on frozen roads because it was so cold, and sleeping on the same pull-out couch with my sister in the living room of a house where my dad was renting a room. Christmas can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, some of it joyful and some of it not so much. I've titled the message this morning, Joy in the Dark. So here's what we're going to talk about in hopefully 30 minutes. Or a little bit less. What is joy? What is it that we talk about so much this time of year? What is the nature of joy? And what are some cultural realities that we encounter that act as an obstacle to finding joy? Second is darkness, as both the absence of light, i.e. nighttime, and the feeling of darkness, which is also a real emotion this time of year for many. And finally, how the story of Christmas and the incarnation of Jesus allows us, even encourages us, to embrace the darkness, both forms, in order to find joy. So So what can we learn in the dark? So let's start with joy. It is a complicated concept because we use the word interchangeably for different things. We can experience a state of joy. For me, playing a sport gives me such joy. When we were playing the Skate Life hockey tournament, cross-trekking Brennan into the boards, that was joyful for me. Getting together with my Aussie football team, that's joyful. Runners often report the feeling of joy that the act of running brings them. Musicians report about being filled with joy as they create something, and so on. You can also use the word joy to express the source of joy in our lives. My children are the source of joy in my life, for example. Also, we can use it to describe a feeling. I jumped for joy. These are all subtly different uses for the same word. So what is it then? A state that we feel, a source or another emotions to flow from, an expression of how we feel about something in a given moment? We see the same kind of thing in Scripture as well. Matthew 2:10, when the Magi follow the star to Jesus and finally get there, they are overwhelmed with joy. We see in John 3:29, when John the Baptist sees Jesus for the first time, he is also consumed with joy. And he gives the analogy of a groom seeing his bride and listening to her on the first time on their wedding day. It's a beautiful picture. And Paul, in Philippians, which is often called the book of joy, is constantly encouraging the people he's writing to express their joy and to rejoice because of their joy. So it's often a result of striving and desiring. The Magi, again, are a good example because they've been following the star for some time. And when they finally get there and see the king they've been searching for, they are filled with the joy that comes from the satisfaction of the fulfillment of a promise that they've been striving for. That being said, it's not always because something that you have to work for. There are many examples in Scripture, literature, and life where there are examples of people being surprised by joy, so to speak. If you know C.S. Lewis, then you get the reference. At this point, it might be good to compare pleasure and joy. Many things are pleasurable. A good meal, for example. I'm sure many of us will share a good meal in the next week or so. Prepared well is a very pleasurable experience. Now take that same meal and imagine that it was prepared by a dear loved one, maybe a child trying to cook a turkey for the first time, a grandparent using the opportunity to spoil their family. The character of the pleasure has changed to a joyful experience. So joy is expressed as something which exists outside of our own capacity to enjoy something. Philip Kennison puts it this way, as a quote that'll be on the screen. Joy is simply one of the consequences of being open to that which is beyond oneself. To pursue joy for its own sake, in order to take delight in its own delight, is to ignore the crucial other-directedness of joy. It's from a book called Life on the Vine, Cultivating the Fruit of the Spirit in Christian Community. Joy ultimately comes from the outside, and we are foolish to think that we are able to generate joy by simply wishing it to be. You can't make joy out of nothing because you want it to be that way. I can't stand here and try really hard to be joyful. I can't hold my breath and all of a sudden be filled with joy. It doesn't work. I have to go through something outside of myself in order to attain it. That's why the Magi, again, are filled with joy when they meet Jesus. And John 16 compares our joy to come in relationship with Jesus to childbirth. Striving, hoping, dreaming for something outside of ourselves is the very nature of joy. You can't find it by focusing on yourself. Speaking of children, the passage that I just referenced focuses on the woman in the picture. Obvious reasons, rightfully so. However, as a guy, I can also talk about the joy of having children. It is one thing for me to talk about being a dad when Robin was pregnant and to think about what it would be like. However, there is no way to put into words the feeling of joy until you have to clean up puke. Wipe bums and snivels, then be told out of nowhere, like this morning, a little voice saying, "I love you, Daddy," or an unsolicited hug. These moments overshadow the annoying things and the heartbeat of what joy is. To be honest, I had a hard time getting excited about having kids, being around when Robin was pregnant. It was very difficult for her to understand why, because I was thinking of it more in terms of how I would be affected, how children would affect my life. And that's just how I thought about it until I actually had the opportunity to hold them. It's a game changer. I had to move myself out of the center in order to experience that joy. So, speaking of obstacles, it should come as no huge surprise that the main obstacle to experiencing joy, real, deep, and meaningful joy, is the pursuit of happiness. And I don't mean the Will Smith movie. I mean the dominant cultural engine of manufactured desire, or advertising. We are encouraged in all kinds of ways, sometimes we don't even notice it because it happens so much, to chase after our desires. It is a relentless pursuit of pleasure, of more things, more toys, more TVs and clothes. My big weakness, the constant upgrade cycle of planned obsolescence and better technology. There is no end. Not happy? Just buy X thing and you'll have a better life. You'll be cool, attractive, desirable, part of the in crowd, and so on. It's about orienting ourselves towards others and away from self, where we find joy, and it's no wonder that consumerism is a major obstacle to a life of joy. And yet, just as this time of year, we want to be experiencing the most joy that we can. We sing about it. We hear sermons about it. We preach about it. We are distracted by the things that we want. Maybe you don't struggle with this. Good for you. Please teach the rest of us. There is no denying that as a society, we really do profoundly struggle with this. This year, Robin and I have been talking a lot about how to incorporate more tradition into our celebration of Advent as we lead up to Christmas. A lot of the reason for this has been brought about by the dissatisfaction with the prevalent culture of advertising and consumerism which surrounds Christmas. Let's watch this short video I'm going to play that talks about this.
For many of us, Christmas is a time of year that holds some of our dearest memories. We're introduced as kids to this season that brings our loved ones together and is filled with celebration. We sang songs, set up nativities, decorated houses. We learned Christmas is actually a real story with shepherds, wise men, Joseph and Mary. The story of when God the Father gave his son. But now that I have children of my own, it feels like the story of Christmas is simply a story about more toys, more things. And even though I'm the parent, I gotta admit that in all the busyness, I buy into it too. I've traded away the best story in the world for what's on sale. What if God had something better than this for all of us? I want to show my kids the real story of Christmas this Advent season. And honestly, I don't know what this will mean for our family. I hope it changes the way we spend money, who we bless, the type of gifts we give, and just how we talk and think about Jesus. The story of Christmas isn't told with free 2-day shipping or Black Friday deals. The story of Christmas changed the world. So, shouldn't it change us?
Advent Conspiracy is a campaign which was started by a group of pastors in the U.S. in 2010, and it goes by 4 principles, which you saw there. Worship fully. Put God at the center of our attitude towards Christmas. Spend less. Focus less on buying gifts and maybe do something homemade. Give more. Give more relationally with friends, family, and neighbors. And then love all. Take the money you normally spend and donate it to those in need. There are a number of resources which are available on their website which help to learn more about what this means. And Robin and I have found it very helpful. There is a board game that you can print out that leads a family through Advent centered on one of these major themes per week. Worshiping God, spending less money for gifts we don't need, giving more relationally to each other and to our neighbors, and loving all by taking what we had spent on gifts and donating it to those in need. One way that we are trying to instill these principles is through doing a reverse Advent calendar. So for each day, there's a different instruction to count up something which we take for granted and donate a certain amount. So, for example, to count how many shoes we own and donate a quarter per pair. How many light switches in our home equals 10 cents. $1 for every girl in our extended family who's graduated high school, and $5 if we own a car, and so on. We go around the house with the kids and they help us count all the items, and then we put the money in the calendar, which is a Christmas tree that has little pull-out drawers. On Christmas morning, we're going to go through and count the money together and decide what causes we're going to donate towards as a family. Right now, my beard is causing issues with this thing. Right now, we have a list of charities that the kids can choose from, and with the idea that as the years pass, and as they grow in ownership of this tradition, they're going to contribute their own money as well, and then we're going to sit down as a family and decide the things that are important to us that we can have a difference in. And like what was said in the video, we don't know exactly what this is going to look like over time. But we are hoping that by instilling the thought of other, we are able to facilitate a deeper understanding of what joy is for our kids in receiving their gifts as well. So now that we've scratched the surface on joy, let's spend a little bit of time thinking about the dark. Leaving the history aside of December 25th and how that came to be the day we celebrate the birth of Jesus, let's just say it's rather convenient that our celebration of the anticipation Advent comes to a climax just as we are coming through the darkest time of the year. Personally, I don't think that's any coincidence. But the greatest source of joy in the yearly rhythm of the Christian calendar comes at the darkest time. You see, the story of Jesus' birth is very much set in the dark in more than one way. We are told in Luke 2, verse 7, there was no room available. And so he ended up being born in a manger. And now just a little sidebar for the Bible geeks in the room. We had a really great opportunity a number of years ago where we were traveling in Israel. And we came to some of the hills areas surrounding Bethlehem. And there's all these caves. And the scholar that we were with pointed at them and said, this is likely what we're talking about when we talk about the manger. It's not this timber constructed thing, but probably a cave on the side of a hill. And it's also, archaeologists think that the story of Ruth and Boaz happened in roughly the same kind of area. Back to the setting of being in the dark. If we define darkness as both the lack of light and anxiety, we can see that this story happened very much in the dark. So no room. Probably because they were late getting there, having traversed the country on a donkey with a pregnant woman. Not to mention the fact that Jesus was about to be born in the midst of a scandal. An unwed couple about to have a baby. And that culture would have not gone over well, let's say. They're also being forced to go and take part in a census due to the decree of a foreign occupying king. They were being ruled from afar and likely had to go through Roman checkpoints along the road to even get there. You end up in a cave, giving birth to a child in the midst of a scandal while being forced to do something by a foreign king. Oh, and then there's also the whole part about them having to run for their lives in a little while to Egypt because King Herod decrees that every young boy should be murdered to protect his own puppet throne. So we get the situation here that there's probably a sense of anxiety in this couple. A I think the Holy Family wins. They know anxiety, they know darkness, but yet they also know great joy. Luke 2:19, but Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. Mary was able to see the joy in the midst of a desperate situation. This was a miracle happening right in front of her, from within her, pure joy expressed as a baby in the midst of desperate darkness. Maybe this little verse that Mary had pondered these things in her heart is something to pay attention to. What can we learn in the dark if we were to be present to it and ponder what God might be trying to say? Speaking from my own experience, having gone through times where I was filled with anxiety and unsure where any sense of light was going to come from, I appreciate the joys in such a deeper way with that context. I have a feeling that we are about to celebrate Christmas, as we're about to celebrate Christmas in the next week, that there are those of us who are experiencing great joy. I'm also sure that there are some of us that are experiencing great darkness right now. Still, some of us are also able to enjoy the celebration to a deeper degree because of having gone through darkness. To that point, is it just me, or does it seem like lights are coming up earlier and earlier every year? Robin calls me a humbug because of this. So maybe it's just my own thing. But I'm very spiritual. The brightness of our trees and the number of lumens being shot into the air gets higher and higher. I can even remember a story last year about pilots being distracted because of lasers coming off of people's houses. That's crazy. I have a theory. This is the theory. That as a society, we are becoming more and more focused on the consumerism of Christmas and getting further and further away from the darkness of it. Or should I say, getting less comfortable with the darkness of it. We are able to be present to the God who was born in the dark. We might be able to say something to us that we aren't ready or willing to listen to in the light. Maybe this is because the God of light shines so much brighter in the dark. Like a candle in a dark room, the birth of Jesus within the context of great darkness is like the incarnation of Jesus today within our own darkness. He is willing and ready to meet us there, even if we don't want to be there. He will. John 8:12, Jesus declares himself as the light of the world. And in John 1:5, we read that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There's a tension there. The God of light, which darkness cannot overcome, is acquainted with suffering, as we know, born in the dark, and brings news of great joy. I hope that this Christmas we can allow God to change us like he changed the world. Before we go, I want to read a story. Bear with me. As a reminder of the great history of the Christian tradition in finding joy in the face of resistance and darkness. We sang this song already, and I hope you can find joy in this story. The strange and fascinating story of Cirque de Noël began in France. It eventually made its way around the world. The seemingly simple song, inspired by a request from a clergyman, would not only become one of the most beloved anthems of all time, it would make a technological revolution that would forever change the way that we are introduced to music. In 1847, and if you speak French, I'm terribly sorry, Placide Cappeau was the commissioner of wines in a small French town. Known more for his poetry than his church attendance, it probably shocked Placide when his parish priest asked the commissioner to pen a poem for Christmas Mass. Nevertheless, the poet was honored to share his talents with the church. In a dusty coach traveling down a bumpy road to France's capital city, Placide Cappeau considered the priest's request, using the Gospel of Luke as his guide. Cappeau imagined witnessing the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. Thoughts of being present on the blessed night inspired him. By the time he arrived in Paris, Cirque de Noël had been completed. Moved by his own work, Cappeau decided that his Cirque de Noël was not just a poem, but a song in need of a master musician's hand. Not musically inclined himself, the poet turned to one of his friends, Adolphe Charles Adams for help. The son of a well-known classical musician, Adolphe had studied in the Paris Conservatoire. His talents and fame brought requests to write books in orchestras and ballets all over the world. Yet, the lyrics that his friend Capot gave him must have challenged the composer in a fashion unlike anything he received from London, Berlin, or St. Petersburg. As a man of Jewish ancestry, for Adolphe, the words of Cirque de Noël represented a day he did not celebrate and a man he did not view as a son of God. Nevertheless, Adams quickly went to work, attempting to marry an original score to compose beautiful words. Adams' finished work pleased both poet and priest. The song was performed just 3 weeks later at a midnight mass on Christmas Eve. Initially, Cirque de Noël was wholeheartedly accepted by the church in France, and the song quickly found its way into various Catholic Christmas services. But when Placide Capot walked away from the church and became a part of the socialist movement, the church leaders discovered that Adolphe Adams was a Jew. The song, which had quickly become one of the most beloved Christmas songs in France, was suddenly and uniformly denounced by the church. The heads of the French Catholic Church at the time deemed Cirque de Noël as unfit for church services because of its lack of musical taste and total absence of the spirit of religion. Yet even as the church tried to bury the Christmas song, the French people continued to sing it. And a decade later, a reclusive American writer brought it to a whole new audience halfway around the world. Not only did the American writer John Sullivan Dwight feel that this wonderful Christmas song needed to be introduced to America, he saw something else in the song that moved him beyond the story of the birth of Christ. An ardent abolitionist, Dwight strongly identified with the lines of the third verse. Truly he taught us to love one another. His law is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppressions shall cease. The text supported Dwight's own view of slavery in the South. Published in his magazine, Dwight's English translation of O Holy Night quickly found favor in America, especially in the North during the Civil War. Back in France, even though the song had been banned from the church for almost 2 decades, many commoners still sang it. Legend has it that on Christmas Eve in 1871, in the midst of fierce fighting between the armies of Germany and France during the Franco-Prussian War, a French soldier suddenly jumped up out of his muddy trench. Both sides stared at the seemingly crazed man, boldly standing with no weapon in his hand or at his side. He lifted his eyes, and I'm not going to say this phrase because it's entirely in French, but he sang the first line of the song. After completing all 3 verses, a German infantryman climbed out of his hiding place and answered in a German phrase, which is the beginning of Martin Luther's "From heaven above, earth I come." The story goes that the fighting stopped for the next 24 hours while the men at both sides observed a temporary peace in honor of Christmas Day. Perhaps the story had a part in the French church once again embracing Cirque de Noël the following holiday year. Adams had been dead for many years, and Capot and Dwight were old men when on Christmas Eve in 1906, Reginald Fessenden, a 33-year-old university professor and former chief chemist for Thomas Edison, did something long thought impossible. Using a new type of generator, Fessenden spoke into a microphone, and for the first time in history, a man's voice was broadcast over the airways. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. He began in a clear, strong voice, hoping that he was reaching across the distances that he supposed he would. Shocked, radio operators on ships and astonished wireless owners at newspapers sat slack-jawed as their normal coded impulses, heard over tiny speakers, were interrupted by a professor reading from the Gospel of Luke. To the few who caught the broadcast, it must have seemed like a miracle, hearing a voice somehow transmitted so far away. Some might have believed that they were hearing the voice of an angel, like in Luke. Preston was probably unaware of the sensation that he caused on ships and in offices. He couldn't have known that men and women who rushed to their wireless units to catch the Christmas Eve miracle. After finishing his recitation of the birth of Christ, Fessenden picked up his violin and played O Holy Night. The first song ever sent through the air via radio waves. When the carol ended, so did the broadcast, but not before music had found a new medium that would take it around the world. Since that first rendition at a small Christmas Mass in 1847, O Holy Night has been sung millions of times in churches in every corner of the world, and since that moment, a handful of people, first hearing it played over the radio, the carol has gone on to become one of the entertainment's industry most recorded and played spiritual songs. This incredible work, requested by a forgotten parish priest, written by a poet who would later split from the church, given soaring music by a Jewish composer, and brought to America to serve as much as a tool to spotlight the sinful nature of slavery as to tell the story of the birth of a Savior, has become one of the most beautiful, inspiring pieces of music ever written. I sincerely hope that this Christmas and for years to come, you are able to engage in the darkness of Christmas and find true joy in the gift of a God who became one of us so that he could bring light into our world. I challenge each of us, myself included, to find a moment over the next week, find a silent, dark moment. You can sit with God and listen. No lit tree, music, sound from a mall, just you, maybe a candle. As we anticipate his coming, one O Holy Night, into the world, we might have, what might he have to say to us in the dark as we ponder and place those thoughts in our hearts. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, we are so thankful that so many years ago you made the decision to send your Son. You made the decision to come and be one of us, to meet us in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our struggle, so that we could begin to understand how much you love us. We thank you for the joy that you bring to us, for the amazing joy being able to relate to the God of the universe in such a simple and profound way. A baby. A relationship. I pray that as we ponder these thoughts over Christmas, that we are able to sit with you. And I pray that whatever you might have to say to each of us, no matter where we are in our lives, that it would mean something to us individually. It would draw us closer to you. Thank you, Father.